Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is another edition of It Came From the Network. On this we review the weird, the wacky, the strange, the downright bad things that have happened in the history of wrestling, which you could go and watch through your WWE Network subscription. Go back and watch these at your convenience. Kind of my homage to Mystery Science Theater 3000, although I can't afford to put the video behind me or in front of me or whatever it would be, and talk about it as it's going because Vince McMahon would sue the crap out of me. Anyway, on to the show. This week, or this show, we're doing WCW Capital Combat 1990. Now, we'll go right into it, and you'll see about halfway through, we get the theme of the show. First match of the night was Kevin Sullivan, Cactus Jack, and Bam Bam Bigelow. Quite an impressive six-man team versus the Legion of Doom and Norman the Lunatic, or at that time was just being called Norman. One of these things is not like the other. Kind of reminded me of Sesame Street. You got 5 guys in this match that are legitimate, either Hall of Famers or should be Hall of Famers, and Norman the Lunatic. Not a terrible match, good way to start the show, good way to get us interested. A very young Cactus Jack in the match in his first run in WCW before they really knew what to do with him, like they ever did know what to do with him. Sorry folks. Good match, though, to start off the show, get us into it. The faces, the Road Warriors, and Norman win the match. Good to decent match. I always thought that Kevin Sullivan and Cactus Jack worked great together as a team. The addition of a guy like Bam Bam Bigelow, one of the great big men of all time, just made it even better. Now, next up, we have Johnny Ace, who most of you guys know as the man behind People Power, John Laurinaitis. This was full skater gimmick mode, Johnny Ace. I think it was not long after the Dynamic Dudes broke up, or maybe Shane was injured at this point. I don't remember the exact time frame of that. But he's wrestling a guy that would go on to become one of the hugest names in the history of wrestling. Now, it's Mean Mark. Now, you're saying to me, I don't know who Mean Mark is. You do, though. He became The Undertaker not very long after this, and went on to dominate wrestling for the next 20-plus years. Good match, a neat way to look at a guy like The Undertaker before he was The Undertaker, see how he worked before he had the Dead Man. The first 5-6 years of The Undertaker, he did a Dead Man Zombie gimmick where he worked very slow, very stiff. He was very stiff in this match, but more of a faster pace. Almost more of what we see from The Undertaker today, we seen back then. He did a lot of his signature stuff. He walked the ropes, however, he didn't do the old school. He just walked on his own and dropped an elbow, which was quite impressive for a guy of his size. Nice to go back and see the introduction of a guy like The Undertaker. As you can see, this show is littered by a bunch of guys that would go on to bigger and better things. And Undertaker as Mean Mark, definitely one of them. Wins with the heart punch, followed by that walk on the rope elbow drop. A good way to showcase a newer talent to their show. I thought it was awesome. I wonder if they look back, the people in charge and say, I wish we could have kept this guy, look at what he became. Next up, we have Captain Mike Rotundo in full boat captain mode, and Tommy Wildfire Rich versus the Samoan SWAT team. Now, if you remember, there were three members in the SWAT team, 2 different versions. First we had Fatu and Samu. Fatu, who would go on to become Rikishi. This one we had Fatu and the Samoan Savage, who was formerly known as King Tonga, and Tama in the WWE as part of the Head Shrinkers. This was a decent match. I don't remember the story behind Rotundo and Rotunda, as they said on this show. It was weird as a kid back in those days, because he'd be Mike Rotundo, and then he'd be Mike Rotunda all of a sudden, and they'd go back and forth, and I don't think they really ever decided on how to spell his last name. Nice little match, the Samoan SWAT team. It's cool to watch, and then fast forward to today and watch a team like the Usos and see the similarities and the differences between the two teams. Obviously, the Uso brothers, their father is Fatu. Very similar, yet a little bit different. And that's what the evolution of the sport of professional wrestling changes have come into the sport that make them, they're not exactly a comedy tribute act to these guys either. They're their own thing. Samoan SWAT team, I always enjoyed. They went on to become the Head Shrinkers as well. I thought they were one of the teams that never really got to do with how good they were. They won this match, but I don't think that no one ever pushed them to the heights they could have been pushed to. Either combination, either Tonga Kid and Fatu, or Fatu and Samu, I thought were both great combinations. Whether it be their WCW runs, WCCW, or WWE runs, I thought it was a great team. Now next up, we had a manager versus manager match. We had Doom and the Road Warriors were feuding at the time. Precious Paul Ellering went up against Teddy Long with either man's hair on the line should they lose. Teddy Long wears full boxing gear with a head thing and gloves. You find out he takes the gloves off. You find out the gloves loaded. Paul Ellering picks up the win. They give Teddy Long a trim, which Teddy Long was going bald anyway. Probably was just something he was planning on doing his own, but why not write it into a storyline? A nice little fun match. Didn't go too long. Didn't drag on bad. It kept the fans excited. It brought together, like I said, just a piece of little bit of fun added to the show. Next up, we got the Midnight Express, Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton versus, again, a young wrestler who would go on to be much greater, Flying Brian Pillman and the Z-Man for the Pillman and Z-Man's U.S. Tag Team Championships. Yes, folks, tag team wrestling at one point was so popular that they had 2 tag titles in one show. The Midnights pick up the win with some interference with Jim Cornette. Well, no, I'm sorry. They didn't have interference from Jim Cornette. He was locked in the cage. He did distract a couple times, but didn't actually get to interfere in the match. Midnights pick up the win. I believe not soon after this that Pillman and Z-Man broke up a bit. I think they wanted to put both of them in the light heavyweight division that they were starting to build and didn't want to use them as a team. I think this is one of the last runs with the Midnights having tag titles. Good match, good way to execute the show. So far, the theme of the show, this is the second of 4 tag team matches in the night, not including the 6-man tag. They were all pretty good, all solid matches. You got to see a glimpse of what Brian Pillman would become later. You got to see Z-Man, who was Tom Zink. Solid worker, but never really had an it factor to make him bigger than what he was. Now next up, we finally get to the tagline for the show. We have Sting coming out because Sting's going to be returning soon from an injury. He's hijacked by the 4 Horsemen who put him in the cage that the previous match Jim Cornette was set in. And Sting's friend, Robocop, comes out to break him out of the cage. Now, folks, this was done, I believe, to promote Robocop 2, the movie, as a cross-promotion with WCW. They built it up for weeks. The tagline of the show was WCW Capital Combat, Return of Robocop. That's why I didn't say it in the beginning. I didn't want to spoil it till we got here where we would talk about it. The announcers and the wrestlers all treated Robocop like he was real. Like Robocop lived in our world. Ignoring the fact that even if he was real, in the movies it says it happens in the future. I know. It's goofy. It's WCW. This is the main reason why the show became on here. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you guys. I'm halfway through this review, and I thoroughly enjoyed the actual wrestling on the show. A lot more than I thought I was going to. This little angle made me remember the show in a different light, to where I thought this was one of the bad pay-per-views of all time. And a lot of people have rated it as such. However, there's a lot of solid wrestling matches on here. The 4 tag team matches that are on the show are very good. The main event match, which we'll talk about in a minute when we get there, is a very solid match. One of the 2 men involved's very best matches, in my opinion. However, this segment was so bad that it brought the expectations and the recollection of the show down so far that I remembered it personally as one of the worst wrestling shows I ever seen. Again, I was pleasantly surprised, especially with matchups like we had next. The Rock and Roll Express versus the Freebirds. And this Freebirds was the Michael P.S. Hayes, Jimmy Jam Garvin version. Solid tag team. I prefer the original 3, Buddy Jack, Michael P.S., and Bam Bam. I know other people, my friend Gary Rhodes, who does the show with me, he enjoys this version better than the original. Both solid wrestlers, both solid teams. What I thought was really awesome was we get to see Ricky Morton play the face in peril, which the role has become synonymous with Ricky Morton. The Rock and Rolls pick up the win. It was kind of, at the time, you didn't have much bigger. I mean, look at the names of the tag teams we have on the show. The Rock and Roll Express, the Freebirds, the Legion of Doom. Soon, the next match we have Doom, the Steiner brothers. Some of the great tag teams, the Midnight Express, all on one show. And this was a very good match with 2 of the greatest tag teams in the history of wrestling going up against each other. Very good wrestling, very good match for us. Nice fast pace. Love seeing the Ricky Morton face in peril. No one's done it better than him. That's why it's named after him. That's why it'll always be the Ricky Morton, pulling a Ricky Morton when you do act the face in peril role. Rock and Rolls pick up the win, by the way. Next up we have Doom, Butch Reed, and Ron Simmons. Again, sticking with a guy that in the future, the short future in WCW, and then in WWF, became a much bigger star in Ron Simmons versus the Steiner brothers for the World Tag Team Championships. Doom picks up the win over the Steiners in a very, very good match. If not for the main event of the show, this would be my favorite match of the show. I really enjoyed the stiff power match that the 2 teams worked against each other. I enjoyed Doom as a team. Even back then, Doom was one of my favorite teams. I liked what I seen from them. Now that I understand it better, and I understand how an older, more experienced Butch Reed helped to groom Ron Simmons and make him almost into a Butch Reed clone, gave us a lot of the same mannerisms, a lot of the same movements. However, it helped teach Ron Simmons how to work. Butch Reed is one of the guys, he's a very underrated worker in the history of wrestling. He was in WWE, they didn't do much with him. They didn't do much with him in WCW other than his Doom run. The only territory he really did much in was the Mid-South area, where he was a huge star there. The guy was good. He was one of the really good, stiff workers of the 1980s and 1990s. He's kind of one of them guys that gets forgotten with time, but very good wrestler. And this was one hell of a match. The Steiner brothers, people forget because they look at Scott Steiner and the freak he became, the genetic freak, puffed up, all steroided out. But at one point, the Steiner brothers were one of the great tag teams in the history of wrestling. They're so fast, so crisp. They threw suplexes like it was nothing. They moved around the ring like it was nothing. I mean, he did the Frankensteiner, which is a standing Hurricanrana. The two teams together was just awesome. I liked the way they won. Teddy Long caused the distraction for Doom to pick up the win. All in all, I thought it was a very good match. Like I said, other than the main event, this was the match of the night. Now we're talking about the main event. We had Lex Luger versus Ric Flair in a steel cage match. And it's not only a steel cage match. This is the cage that they used for the Thunderdome cage, which is kind of a precursor of, I honestly think it's a precursor to what they eventually did with the Hell in a Cell, where the cage went around the ringside area as well as the ring, so you could go outside the ring and still be in the cage. All over this wasn't roofed. It had at the top of the cage, there was like angles so no one could climb in. They set up the match. Awesome match. I think this is one of Lex Luger's top 5 matches in his career, if not top 1 or 2. I'm hard pressed to think of any others that were much better than this. This match, he was absolutely on fire. It didn't hurt that he had one of the greatest, I'll go out on a limb and say the greatest wrestler of all time, Ric Flair, in there with him at the peak of Ric Flair's skill set. Very good match, very good cage match. Luger picks up the win when the Horsemen get the controls for the cage and raise it up, sneak in and attack him. Sting manages to get the controls back, so Sting, and the debuting, first time we ever seen him, El Gigante, come out and chase off the Horsemen. Now, El Gigante did a whole bunch of nothing. He just kind of walked and they ran away from him, which is basically the whole career of El Gigante. But we got to see in this match, and again, a younger version of Sting who would go on to greatness. He was already on the road to greatness at this point. Fantastic main event. I think, personally, 1990 and 1991 were 2 of the last great years of WCW. They had great moments after that, but I think those were the 2 last years where the whole year was good. I look back at this now, and this pay-per-view was a lot better, like I said earlier, a lot better than in my brain I remembered it being. I'm very happy that I went back and watched this. I did not give it much. I didn't have no great expectations going in. Coming out of it, I was thoroughly enjoyed with it. The 2 things that I could say probably clouded my judgment are the Robocop angle and El Gigante, who we went on to see do absolutely nothing in wrestling except be cannon fodder for The Undertaker and be in some of WCW's worst matches. But again, much better show than I thought it was going to be. Very glad I went back to review this. Now we're going to go to our rating system. Now if you've seen our show before, we do a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is the worst, 5 is the best. 1's a gobbledygooker, 2's a renegade, 3's a Hurricane Helms, 4 is a Goldust, 5 is a Kane. Obviously you see all varying successful gimmick characters. I'm going to give the show a 4, a Goldust. The Robocop and El Gigante things are the only thing that kept it from being a 5. Lots of great solid tag team action. You got 4 future superstars, megastars in their early incarnations with Cactus Jack, Mean Mark, Ron Simmons, and Brian Pillman, who would all go on to greater things in their careers. Sting, who was in the middle of his build to becoming being a main eventer. Fatu, who would go on to be Rikishi Fatu and have a successful run as that. I mean, it was a show that was packed with talent, packed with... It was kind of a crossroads. You had some of the great wrestlers of the 1980s merging in with some of the great wrestlers that would become the 1990s. But all in all, a really good show, a fun show to watch. I give it a 4 or a gold dust. I recommend going back and watching it if you haven't. Out of the 3 that I've reviewed for this so far, it came from the network, this was definitely the best show by a landslide. Definitely worth watching again. I would recommend going back and checking it out, even if you have bad memories of this, because I did. And I went back and I was pleasantly surprised. But basically, that's all I have to say about that. My name is George Coles, and this has been another episode of Heel Heat.